Hello, co-teachers. What about co-teachers? Okay, if you're going to be teaching abroad, you may be teaching abroad and you may be teaching with a co-teacher. Okay, it's going to depend on the school and whatnot. So I've taught in Taiwan, Korea, and China. And geez, where should I start? Okay. Well, I started in Taiwan. That was the first place that I, started teaching. And my first, I worked many jobs in Taiwan, but my first main job that gave me like an ARC and a contract and all that was, I taught classes, and all the classes I had a co-teacher in the class. And in most experiences, they didn't really do too much. In the beginning, they didn't. It depended on the co-teacher. Some co-teachers did more. Sometimes they did some classroom management or something like that, or discipline. But usually, they just sat there and corrected other students' work and stuff like that. However, there was few. There's one in particular I remember who was, she got on my nerves. She was a little bit too, in the beginning I wasn't, such a good teacher, I don't think, my first year, So, just kind of meddled. I thought she would meddle a bit too much and, just a little bit too interfering and stuff like that with what's going on, and kind of had her own agenda for class. But really, you're the head teacher, or I was in that situation. They're just there to maybe translate or something like that. Although if you're teaching well, you don't need translation. Translation is just one teaching method for learning a language. So my first year, so it was a little bit tense at times. I think working with a couple of co-teachers in my first year. So. And then going into my second contract in Taiwan, it was much better. I was, I had gained some experience in my first year, and then in my second contract, I was teaching by myself, and I really realized that this is better. It really depends. Co-teachers, I think it really depends on the luck of the draw, so to speak, who you get. You can't control, who you're going to be surrounded with, who's going to be your co-teacher. You can't control that. You can't control how you react to it. So basically, I just prefer teaching by myself by far in all situations. Pretty much. So yeah, in my second year, I didn't have a co-teacher, and I had the woman who owned the school. It was a private school. She had a good system in place, and she herself was a good teacher. So she was kind of a good role model for me, and just gave me some advice, how to do things, and really expected you to prepare for class and whatnot. So that was, a good experience for me, and much better being alone in the classroom. So yeah, then going into my third year in Korea, pretty much there were co-teachers around. You'll be teaching in a school, and there'll be whatever Korean or Chinese co-teachers teaching classes at the same time with you in the private school setting anyway. So my third year was like that. They didn't teach in the class with you, but sometimes you shared a class. Like they would teach them for an hour, and then you would teach them for an hour. In that situation, they weren't really a problem. There's a couple that I just don't really get along with, co-workers and whatnot, and co-teachers, but they weren't in the classroom, so it's a lot better, I think. So basically, I think co-teachers can complicate the situation. You could get lucky and get a good co-teacher. So now, breezing through to my fourth contract in Korea. Now, I did a bunch of other, part-time gigs and, jobs for a month here and there and stuff like that. But my fourth contract in Korea was teaching teaching in a public school in Korea. And this was, yeah, I mean, the actual teaching was a mix. If you're going to teach in a public school, you're going to have a co-teacher. And yeah, like they said, and I've already said, it's really the luck of the draw. You know, some people have a co-teacher and have a horrible experience with them. Some people have a co-teacher and they get along great, and there's some sort of compatibility. But with my co-teacher, we just personality just didn't get along. She was really religious, and I'm not religious, and we just didn't get along. You know, we didn't. And in Korea, in a public school, you're not really the lead teacher. You know, you're like basically a support teacher. You're basically an assistant teacher to the Korean teacher. I mean, as far as the documentation goes, stuff like that, it's like that. Your situation could be a little bit different. They could give you more responsibility, but you know, the rule is, you know, the documentation is that you're an assistant. You know, so however, so in my experience, I taught let's see, 22 hours total. I think I taught 12 classes with her, and in these classes she was in charge of planning, and they used the basic public school Korean public school books, and they teach a lot in Korean. It's like Korean English mix and stuff like that. There's no rule, English only rule or anything like that. And then I had 10 hours teaching classes. Basically, I chose the books for the class. Basically, I was in charge. She did nothing, just sat there, which was fine. I mean, I just prefer she wasn't there, but that was better. In the other classes, I didn't really do too much in the other classes. I just sometimes would add some activity to the class or something like that in the beginning or end, or maybe somewhere in the middle. So, and then my classes, basically my own way, but there's just there was a lot of tension between her and I, and we had to work together every day, and it was stressful. It added a lot of stress to my job working with her. So I'd never do that again. I wouldn't teach. For me, the only way is teaching by myself. That's the only way. And I've taught now in the States too, and after school programs. So it's less complicated. Teaching by yourself is simple. You're the one responsible. You got to make it work. It's up to you, But when you have another person, another co-teacher, they can complicate the matter. So your personality. I don't know. You have to ask yourself some questions. What kind of person are you? Someone who really prefer teaching by yourself? Then look for a job where you don't have to, work with a co-teacher. Or make sure, if you do have a co-teacher, make sure what the roles are, and you don't want to be an assistant, to them, And for me, I had more experience than she did teaching, but I was considered an assistant to her. I had more experience, and and in my opinion, I was a better teacher too. Yet, it's just the Korean hierarchy, the rules and stuff. So, yeah, if you're just starting off, they can help, It just depends, though, Depends on the situation, the school, and the actual co-teacher, So if you're just starting, you might not have much of a clue, and maybe they can help you, So yeah, that's my little bit about co-teachers.